I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do my wrap-up and review of the 2020 BookTube Prize Octafinals round. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I mean, it's been difficult to, keep the secret going these past couple of months, and then, with the coronavirus, I think we all need a little something to cheer us up, and so I've kind of been clinging to this. I've been scouring the internets, the BookTube internets, ever since Robert posted the official Octafinals wrap-up, which I will post down below as well. I've loved all of the videos by my fellow judges, although I don't think I've yet seen one for my particular group. I judged for nonfiction in Group B. Now, if I have to be honest, I signed myself up as a possible nonfiction judge because I wanted to be a team player, because I knew that Robert wanted to add a nonfiction division to the prize this year, and that nonfiction is less popular than fiction, so he might have more trouble getting judges. So I signed up to be a nonfiction judge and also a fiction judge, and I wasn't sure which one I'd get, and I ended up getting nonfiction. I am not primarily a nonfiction reader, and I found this task especially daunting because the books are of such a wide variety in subject matter and genre, really, of nonfiction. And I just felt like once I got to this stage, no matter how I'd do the judging, the guardians of nonfiction on BookTube would jump up from their posts and come after me and saying, "Hey, get this made-up story lady away from our stuff." I'll have you know I put a lot of thought into the rankings that I did for this group. I hope I can convince you with the rest of this video, and by the fact that my top 3 choices are exactly the 3 that made it through to the quarterfinals. So my fellow judges agree with me in large part. I was surprised by that it was a 3 for 3, but also somewhat invigorated and relieved for the nonfiction thing. But anyway, enough of me dancing around the issue here. I have copies of all 6 books, and I'm here to talk about them and why I ranked them the way that I did. I'm starting with number 6, which was my last placed ranking, and then I'm moving up to number 1. And my final caveat really is that I enjoyed all of these books, or at least could find something to admire and appreciate about all of them. And frankly, I think I would have been happy if any of these books made it to the quarterfinals. So if you are looking for any new reading, I'd suggest the bottom 3 as well. But for the purposes of this prize, something had to go. So starting with number 6, I have Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls, a memoir by T. Kira Madden. This was a memoir about Madden's troubled childhood. She had drug-addled parents, an often absentee father who had another family. She's an incredibly strong writer, and there are pieces of this book that still stick with me, like the tense plotting in Lizard, or the emotional second-person gut punch in The Feels of Love. These are marketed more or less as essays. They're certainly not conventional ones. But I think that Madden painted a visceral and complex picture of her relationships with her parents, her friends, and herself. It's the type of memoir, a rebellious girl from a broken home, that I've read several times before. But I'm not sure that's enough for me to dislike it, because the writing is so strong. There's a lot of criticism out there, including my own, regarding Madden's relationship to Judaism, but I feel like it comes with the sting of bias. Not liking her beliefs or her lifestyle isn't a sign of bad writing either. Maybe the book could have been a little more focused. But ultimately, I'm placing this one in last place because generally speaking, and I think I'm getting into possibly a broader argument here about genre, but I don't think there's anything in this book that one can't get out of fiction. And since this is the nonfiction division of the BookTube Prize, I figured I ought to privilege books that give us something that we can't find in the made-up stories. Number 5 on my list was Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates, Jr. It's difficult to put such an important book so low on my list. Another reason why I'm really looking forward to seeing other videos from my fellow judges, or perhaps talking with them elsewhere about their own thoughts and processes. For me, I thought that Gates's academic writing style was a little too stuffy. I also think that the piece was a little disjointed. This book was somewhat two topics in one. The first was about Reconstruction, which was the time right after the US Civil War. A time that perhaps feels incongruous to us because African Americans attained some civil rights. This was immediately followed by a white supremacy backlash, aka either the Jim Crow laws or outright mass violence that pushed black people back again towards something more like slavery. The second part was about black people responding to this Southern redemption, as they called it, with the Harlem Renaissance. I feel like this book served as a primer to these two broad topics, both of which definitely deserve a lot more attention. I personally found the Harlem Renaissance section to be stronger. The redemption part was certainly harrowing. But the Harlem Renaissance was all about African Americans claiming a voice for themselves anyway. Disparate voices too, because black people had different ideas about what it would take to build up a culture. Gates took a side as well. He liked jazz, which could be seen as lowbrow, but also was maybe more accessible to everyone. Better than he seemed to like Harlem literature. Literary culture, as we book lovers tend to know, can get caught up in ideals about white Western canon. I mean, seriously, reading this book was very, very fascinating. But perhaps one of the biggest takeaways had less to do with what was in the pages themselves and more to do with that reminder that African Americans as a topic and subject are worth more of our attention. For number 4, oh boy, we have The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington to Princeton, 1775 to 1777, which is Volume 1 of the Revolution trilogy by Rick Atkinson. So, are you interested in a meticulous amount of detail in the planning and execution, such as it was, of the US Revolutionary War? If so, this is the book for you, and it's only Volume 1. Seriously, you know, when I first took a look at my judging group, this was the book that intimidated me the most. And even when I section off 200 pages for notes, it's still kind of hella long. And frankly, it's not too accessible to the novice reader. For the advanced reader, one who knows his or her American history backwards and forwards, I can't imagine they'd be anything but impressed. The amount of detail that Atkinson put into these pages must have required an impressive amount of research. Everything from general research, like what happened at each battle, but also intricate research into people's diaries and letters to create a composite reality of what life on the front lines really would have felt like, and a brief or not so brief understanding of loads and loads of people who are involved. Atkinson is also a journalist, so his writing was direct and to the point. Still, most people would probably have to take notes. But hey, you know, it could be worth it. Atkinson doesn't usually go beyond, well, you know, the actual facts on the ground. But sometimes you could get a sense of the enduring American character, or the character of the British Empire and how both of these places would evolve in later history. Like, you know, the reason why we were a bigger threat to the British than any of their other colonies was because we were so heavily armed, which, you know, factors in today. And on the social history level, speaking again of Stony Road, this book also tracked how each side viewed Negroes and how to use them for their own ends. Definitely not a pretty picture, but important in understanding the realities of history. And again, all of this on-the-ground composite details, and this is only Volume 1! It was pretty amazing. Okay, on to the exciting ones, the top 3. And in the number 3 spot, we have Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. Similar to the last book, this one aggregates a lot of data. But instead of going into one microcosmic event, this one goes macrocosmic. It affects all of us, and with respect to our international pool of judges here on the BookTube Prize, that did play into why I put this in my top 3. Criado Perez traveled the globe and prodded all sorts of systems. Economy, health, residential, zoning, etc., etc., etc. Her findings fall into one of 3 categories: violence against women, invisibility vis-a-vis not being counted as the generic, read male, human in data trials, and regarding the specific medical needs for the female sex. It's exhaustingly thorough, and it's true, as has been criticized, that she doesn't have any calls for action for the lay reader. Her call for action is specifically for data statisticians, for them to keep in mind these 3 categories that I just mentioned. She has the receipts for where you failed. And I also think it's an important book for anyone to read. And I commend Criado Perez for finding that tricky balance for rationally sticking to the facts and emotionally reminding us that females are human too. All of these data gaps can be dangerous, even fatal. It can be quite a scary read sometimes. But as a final positive note, I'm very appreciative of the light that Criado Perez shone onto the cost of unpaid care work, which predominantly falls onto women across the globe to fulfill. In the number 2 spot, I have American Predator, The Hunt for the Most Meticulous Serial Killer of the 21st Century by Maureen Callahan. This was a propulsive read. I just sped right through it. And I don't usually read mystery thriller stuff. Though this book does remind me of the 90s when I was attuned to all the Lifetime movies and occasionally tried to learn a little about the real cases. This is a terrifying one about Israel Keyes, who was a serial killer who traveled to spots around the country and buried kill kits, and then would return years later and pick off victims at random. Callahan's book largely follows the law enforcement tracking him down after his final victim. His final of many, some of which we may never know. It's obviously very plot-driven, and Callahan keeps the pace brisk. But she also gave some dimension to the victims and the law enforcement involved. One good guy character who particularly stood out in a bad way was Kevin Feldus from the U.S. Attorney's Office, for whom Callahan could barely hide her chagrin. He kind of viewed this case, or treated this case, as his personal celebrity maker. But the thing that impressed me the most about this book was how Callahan handled Keyes' characterization. He wasn't an everyday man, but he also wasn't some otherworldly creature. He was human, and he doesn't get to go down in this book as someone special or genius for getting away with what he did. At the same time, I feel like it's worth putting out there the fact that serial killers are rare. And frankly, I may be more disturbed by the habits of our law enforcement. I mean, they didn't even check all of the video surveillance around the place that the last victim was kidnapped until after Keyes was in custody. Yikes. If anything, I really hope this book makes them change things for their next case. And finally, in the number 1 spot, I put Trick Mirror, Reflections on Self-Delusion by Gia Tolentino. This almost feels like going full circle because this is also a memoir and essays, more or less, told by a millennial. And I think this is the one, fellow millennials. I think this book is the one that will make other generations empathetic to us. Maybe I'm crazy. And I'm not sure that was Tolentino's intention, but in these essays, she describes what it's like to grow up as a teen and an adult in today's digital age. She talks about the trends that shape the new normal, from the ubiquity of social media to how we optimize everything, from food and exercise and so on. She also talks about the complicated legacies of misogyny, racism, and violence in a world that is more public but also more polarized. It's part memoir, which gives this book a human edge, but Tolentino mostly sticks to worldly stats. And the bits of memoir she drops in feel more complicated than dramatic. They support her theses, and in turn she comes off as more wise. and three-dimensional than other memoirists, especially from the younger set. She's a good writer, and she's crafted her style from a bunch of magazine gigs, and I think she's a cultural critic we should keep our eye on in the future. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to all of my reviews for these books down below now that I've finally been able to post them to Goodreads. I've just been so excited to get it all out there. Perhaps a little too excited. I should chill out a little bit. Especially since I'm about to go hunker down and do all of this again. I'm judging again for the quarterfinals, and I have 6 new books that I'll have to be pretty tight-lipped about until the end of May. But I will be making a video on my preliminary pre-reading thoughts coming up in a couple of days. In the meantime, thank you again to Robert for all of the work you've put into this, all of the incredible amount of work, can't even imagine. And thank you to my fellow judges across 16 groups and all of the amazing reading we did and all of your thoughts that you're sharing with us now. I hope we can get the BookTube Prize to keep growing and growing year by year. I will leave information about it down below. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.